Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty leagues, PPR leagues, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
And thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss everything in the world of fantasy football. As always, I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And we're back with another action-packed show for you guys today for all your fantasy football needs. Well, Anthony, I think we're going to have to start off a fantasy podcast talking about the Cleveland Browns.
Do we have to talk about the Browns? Is that how we talk about the Browns? All right, fine. Let's talk about the Browns.
I like how there was dead air for like 1 second.
Because the Browns, it's just like you have to think about it like, if we're going to talk about the Browns, we're going to talk about... All right, let's talk about the Browns. Perfect, fantastic. Let's talk about the Browns. So what about the Cleveland Browns?
Okay, well, it looks like they have not made up their mind on who they draft as the number one pick. As you course, Myles Garrett has been in pretty much as a clear-cut number one overall pick at this point with the draft a few weeks away, but it looks like they might take Mitch Trubisky at that spot. And, of course, Mitch Trubisky plays quarterback, one of the most important positions in all sports. And, quarterback, they're pretty important in fantasy, I might have to add. So, we may be looking at Mitch Trubisky in a Browns uniform next year, and we have to talk about the quarterback outlook for the Browns in fantasy and how it could pretty much affect the rest of the team around him.
There is no outlook for the Browns at quarterback right now. Like, it's like, oh, look at this. There's no outlook. They have people that play the quarterback position, but that's just like saying just because you wear like a Scooby-Doo costume that makes you Scooby-Doo. That's not the same kind of thing. Like, just because they're playing the quarterback position doesn't mean it's going to be good. Like, don't take any of them. Fantasy advice. Don't take any of the Browns quarterbacks right now. None of them. Not a single one of them. It's a bad idea. Don't do it. All right, good talk. Now, as far as Mitchell Trubisky goes, he is possibly going to be the number one overall pick, but he'll probably be somewhere in the top 10 because he's a quarterback and he's highly talked about. And teams tend to draft basically on hope and, just praying that the quarterback will be good for them. That's what teams have done forever. Like, you basically take a quarterback. Last year, the Rams did that with Jared Goff. The Eagles did that with Carson Wentz. The Patriots, or not the Patriots, the Colts did that with Andrew Luck. Like, this is what they do. The Panthers did it with Cam Newton. Like, you basically take someone and hope that it works out. Sometimes it does, like in the case of Luck and Newton. Sometimes it doesn't, like so far, at least in the sense of Carson Wentz and not Carson Wentz, as far as Jared Goff. But, they're probably going to take a quarterback relatively high, probably either 1 or 12. Like, honestly, that's probably going to happen, either 1 or 12, or maybe they trade up with 12 or something like that. But, like, they need a quarterback. And what's his name? Hugh Jackson. Like, he basically has to save his job. And if you take a quarterback high in the draft, you basically tell the organization, hey, I took him. I need to make sure he does well. Let me stay while he progresses, which is kind of the whole thing Jeff Fisher did, but that didn't work out for him. He also did some other stuff, got in trouble with some stuff like Eric Dickerson and everything else. He got fired. Fantasy football perspective of this whole thing, you have a situation where you have Mitch Trubisky possibly being the number one overall pick. So what does that mean? That means he's going to be given all the opportunities to be the guy. That means he's going to be given all the possible, starts, and he's going to be looked at as the franchise quarterback because of that high of a position you are, whether you are worthy of it or not. You look around, you get someone like Josh Gordon. He's probably gone. You get Terrell Pryor. He's gone. You have not a lot of talent all around with the Cleveland Browns. So what does that mean as far as a fantasy football perspective? He's going to be bad. There's nobody really that the Browns could take. They would immediately have the success. They're a really bad team. Obviously, they went 1-15. So whoever they take, it's not like they're going to be in the top 15 as far as quarterbacks go. They're probably going to be more around the 20 to 25 range just because the last 5 to 7 quarterbacks in the NFL are so bad. And if you're taking that high, you're probably not going to be terrible, but you're probably not going to be great. You're probably going to be somewhere in between, unless they basically pull a Demaryius Russell, and he's one of the worst quarterbacks we've ever seen in our lives.
I don't know. It's going to be pretty hard to be that bad. I don't think Trubisky's going to be that bad.
I mean, probably not.
I don't know. I don't think so. Remember, Trubisky is an Ohio native, so he is going to play for his childhood team. Remember, they do have Brock Osweiler there, quarterback. Remember that.
I say the same thing into the microphone like I said last time. People of this world who play fantasy football, please do not take any Browns quarterback that they have on the roster right now. That includes Brock Osweiler, because we saw him play last year with the Houston Texans. How'd that go? It didn't go well. It went very bad. They won some games, so that's because of him. That's because they have Jadeveon Clowney. Jadeveon Clowney's really good. They have a defense as a whole that's really good. Don't take Osweiler. Don't do it. It's a trap. With the Star Wars trailer coming out today, and harken back to, it's a trap. Don't do that.
It's a trap.
It's bad. It's very bad.
Shout out to Admiral Akbar there. Dang, I don't know where I was going with that. But,
I took a left turn with that.
You did. That you're really good at that.
Left turns.
You're really good at left turns. Now let's make a right turn back into our topic here. Well, I think the one player that I really like fantasy-wise from the Browns, Corey Coleman, honestly.
If he stays healthy.
If he stays healthy, I think he'd be really good.
Yeah.
Isaiah Corral, I just think
he has good games. He has bad games.
Yeah,
you can't really trust him.
He's very inconsistent.
Yeah.
So I just think as of right now, I think Corey Coleman is someone that you probably targeting in the mid rounds. And as for any of these quarterbacks, don't take him.
The good thing with Corey Coleman, we could talk about the Browns having terrible quarterbacks because they do. But the thing with wide receivers and running backs is you can be terrible, but you can be the only guy on the team, and that'll make you good. Like the quarterback, they get sideways because they can throw a lot of interceptions. They get sacked a lot. That makes it bad for a fantasy perspective. For wide receivers, just as long as you keep catching the ball, it doesn't matter how bad the team is as long as you can get the yards. Like we just saw that with Terrell Pryor. Terrell Pryor got a bunch of yards, looked like a really good wide receiver. The team stunk. Like he was the one shining light in that organization. So if you have the situation where he can become any kind of good, I'm talking about Coleman, then that's good for you. That's good for a fantasy football perspective. The whole team around him can be imploding in dumpster fires and just stuff left and right. But he can still be, as far as like a fantasy football perspective, a really good player on the team.
Who do you think, all the quarterbacks this year in the draft, will make the most fantasy impact? Me, I think it could be Deshaun Watson.
Watson's the one I like the best, but it all depends where you go, right? Mm-hmm. Like if Watson decides to go to the Cleveland Browns,
he won't decide.
Well, that's fair enough. If the Browns decide to take him, then I take it back. But if he goes to some team like, let's say, the Cardinals or some team like I'm trying to think of another team that's like Texans. Like if he goes to one of those two teams, then he can have the most success because you have a good set of people around him. It all depends where you actually go. Deshaun Kaiser, as much as Brady Hoke, who's the head coach at Notre Dame?
Brian Kelly.
As much as he may not like him and say he needs to stay another year, if he just goes to like the Texans and all of a sudden he could look like the best quarterback in the draft. Like I don't know how good Dak Prescott is, but Dak Prescott being behind that offensive line and having the teammates around him made him look like a lot better quarterback than he probably would have been if he'd have been in a bad organization like the Jets, right? That's how that kind of works out. Like if you go to a good organization, you can be better. So I would say it depends, but the one that I think has the best chance of it of any of them would probably be Watson because I've seen him basically improvise on the fly against the best defense in the country in Alabama and beat them, right? Like he has a lot of talent. He has a lot of things that are working out for him already. So I think he'd be the one guy that could probably doesn't matter. Like I wouldn't say it doesn't matter what team he goes to, but like he has the best chance of being good right out of the gate. Yeah,
pretty much. And I think a guy that I really like is Patrick Mahomes.
You like him a lot. You talked
do.
about him a lot. Like, you think he's going to be
I think if he improves on his pocket presence, I think he could be really good. He has probably the best arm out of any of these top 4 guys.
Right.
But he has to go to a good team. I think he's a perfect fit for the Cardinals. I think he's a great fit for the Saints, learning behind Drew Brees. But I do like him, but he's not going to make an impact in fantasy. But I have to go with Watson as the most impactful rookie at the quarterback class this year. I think if he goes to the Browns, I still think he can make an impact, but it's going to be very inconsistent. I think the Texans are the best spot for him because he can win right away. And, Deshaun Watson shines bright like a diamond in really big moments. So I do think that's going to be one of the most impactful rookies in fantasy football next year.
As much as we joke about the Cleveland Browns, what do you think is the worst team you could go to? Is it the Browns, or is it the Jets, or is it the Bears? Like, what's the organization right now that, like, if he got drafted him, it's just like, oh, no, that's not going to go well for you.
I don't know about the Bears. The Bears they're not going to be that bad forever. The Jets.
I still say the Jets, because the Browns are at least doing things where they're trying to be like the whole small ball kind of money ball organization thing.
I'll say the Jets because they're not being run correctly right now.
The Jets still are the guys that are basically trying to get their Instagram likes up, just doing a bunch of dumb stuff, just trying to get the likes. Like, that's what the basically Jets have been for the past 25 years. They're trying to get the headlines, basically be the team that's like, oh yeah, look at all the headlines that we got. It's like, cool, you're also 4-12. Like, doesn't help you as much as you think it does.
All right, well, on that note, we're going to take our first break here, and when we return, we're going to discuss Demaryius Thomas. Looks like that a hip injury limited his game last season, so we're going to speculate on his future and his impact in fantasy for 2017 when we return to Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome to the Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And, last season, the Denver Broncos, they weren't one of the best offensive teams. They had concerns at the quarterback position since last offseason, with Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch, competing for the starting job. Well, it looks like it's the same thing again, but it looks like Trevor Siemian is going to be the guy to take the lead. Well, we know the quarterback did affect the play of the receivers last year, and Demaryius Thomas, he did say that his hip injury limited his game in 2016. And, he looks like he's in for another great year after being plagued by injuries this year. I really do think that Demaryius Thomas is a really good receiver. With the hip injury, he logged more than 1,000 yards and caught 90 receptions last year with Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch at the quarterback position. So I do think with him being injured last year and him coming back this year fully healthy, I think he's in for a big 2017.
Yeah, if you can do all that when you're injured, imagine when you're actually healthy. Like, he is somebody who is obviously one of the best wide receivers in the game. He's somebody who has had anywhere from Tim Tebow to Paxton Lynch to Peyton Manning quarterback for you, so he's basically prepared for anything. Like, you imagine going from Tim Tebow to Peyton Manning? Like, that is literally going from the doghouse to the penthouse. Like, literally, it's just like, you take a guy who force of will and everything else, but then it's like, oh, also this guy is one of the best quarterbacks ever to play in the NFL. And then you get bumped down to Paxton Lynch and Trevor Siemian and everybody like that. And like you said, still 1,000 yards, still a bunch of receptions, still somebody who has been, one of the top 10 wide receivers in the NFL. Like, maybe he's not in that, like, Odell Beckham range. Like, he's not Odell Beckham, Calvin Johnson in his prime, Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, people like that. But he's still one of the guys that you draft really high. Some of the guy that you rely on is your number one wide receiver. And if you can do all of this with, like you said, with, like, a sore hip, like, that kind of matters, man. Like, it's not like you having, like, a messed up pinky finger. Like, that's you basically not being able to, like, move on your routes as well. That's you not being able to explode because any kind of, like, movement up, down, sideways, whatever, that all involves your hip, and that probably hurts. Like, I understand they take, like, shots to basically numb the pain, but that wears off eventually, and the fact that he can be as good as he was is a testament to himself.
Yeah, and this hip injury for Demaryius Thomas actually happened in the first game last season against Carolina. So he couldn't shake it off for the remainder of the season.
That's the thing. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not like he did it like in game 15 where it's just like, oh, you only have to deal it for a game. No, he had to deal with it the entirety of the year with quarterbacks that aren't as good. Like, this is probably as good of a thing for him as any, because it's not like him making excuses if he had, like, 45 receptions for, like, 500 yards. Like, this isn't like he had a bad year and he's like, oh, I was injured. No, this is like, I'm still a beast. And I did this injured. Now what? Kind of thing. Like, he's basically, low-key taunting, basically saying, like, I could do all of this with a sore hip. Imagine me being fully healthy.
Yeah, he told ESPN about his hip injury, and he said sometimes it would get bad, sometimes it would get even worse. He never thought about surgery. He knows he can get it, but he doesn't think he needs it. He says he feels great. He's been running routes. Hasn't bothered him. So it just depends on how he gets hit, honestly, maintaining the hips. So, honestly, right now, he said he's fully healthy. He feels good. He's running routes, but that's against grass and in shorts. So, honestly, it just matters of how he can take the hits as of right now. Maybe that's a little bit of a risk concern, maybe. But I do think with him playing injured and, going for over 1,000 yards, that says a lot.
Your weekly reminder that NFL players are insane. All of them, every single one of them is out of their mind because their job description literally is hold this football and try to make sure the other 11 guys don't kill you while you have it in your hand. Like, literally, they are all insane. Like, to play the NFL professionally seems like a poor life choice. Like, it's a great life choice financially. Seems like something where you're kind of a masochist. Like, I am going to play this game that literally the job is basically some version of if this guy has football, make sure he doesn't have football. Like, the whole thing, and like I said, he never thought about getting surgery. Like, do you understand, like, if I had any kind of injury in my hip, like, I'd be like, oh, can I have this surgically repaired? Yes? Okay, let's do that. Like, that's going to be, like, my first thought. Like, I always make jokes about stuff, like, with NFL players and how tough they are because, like, imagine after we do this podcast, I just, like, pushed you down.
No.
Just like I pushed you down. Like, you get annoyed, obviously,
yeah,
and rightfully so. And you'd probably complain to whatever HR department we have here. You'd be like, hey, look, this isn't exactly something that's cool. Like, please don't push me down anymore. To the NFL, it's just like they get it a lot worse and over again. And, I mean, it's not to the level of, like, hockey players, but, like, yeah, sport's kind of insane, man. I don't understand how you can do it for a long period of time. I can understand doing it for, like, a few weeks because, like, adrenaline's a thing. But, like, once you get to, like, the end of your first, like, 3 years – yeah, it hurts. I don't want to do this anymore. Can I not do this anymore? I want to stop doing this. Like, I understand the money's nice, but also this hurts, like, a lot. And that's how people get addicted to pain medication and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's crazy that how these players shake off these injuries like that. But, looking forward to the outlook of the Broncos receivers. They got Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, who they look like they're going to make an impact again despite whoever plays quarterback.
Sure.
I do think with them not getting Tony Romo, this team's going to be affected by that. But I do think that they have a great enough defense to win games. But when you look at this team from fantasy perspective, Demaryius Thomas, I think he's someone that's going to be really someone that you should get probably in the third round. He may be in the second round most fantasy drafts. Emmanuel Sanders, the same thing. They're two really good receivers, especially as your second or third guy, maybe the flex person. Because I remember I played in leagues, I think, especially last year, I think we had to play with 3 receivers and no flexes, which I thought was kind of weird.
Right.
But we just had 3 receivers. So in that kind of format, Demaryius Thomas is really great. When you have a flex, you can definitely put him there. But I like to have that more for a running back type of player. But
right.
Yeah, so I expect both of these guys to be really good next season. But yeah, I talked about the quarterback outlook for the Broncos last year. Not last year. No. I talked about them like a couple weeks ago with them not getting Tony Romo. So what do you expect from these quarterbacks in Denver, Anthony? I kind of expect a little more of improvement from Trevor Siemian. And Paxton Lynch, he looked like he wasn't ready last year. I do think he needs maybe more years to kind of learn the game, get adjusted to the speed. I don't think Trevor Siemian is going to throw like for 5,000 yards or anything, but right. I do think he can be solid enough to be a game manager for the Denver Broncos. That's what they need. They need someone that can manage the game, that can be effective, and don't turn the ball over. I do think that can be him.
Trevor Siemian is what he is probably. Like, he's probably not going to be someone, like you said, that throws for a bunch of yards. He's young enough to where he can still improve, and same thing Paxton Lynch. They're both young players. It's not like a McCown brother where they've been in the league for a decade. Like, they can grow, but I think there's only so far they can actually go. Paxton Lynch is a little bit different because you don't know how good he can be. Like, yeah, he didn't seem like he was good last year, but that happens when you're fairly new into the league. It's really hard to be really good in the NFL. Like, the people that come out the rookie years that are really good, those are anomalies, man. Those are kind of like the outliers and the ones that basically prove that, like, oh, you're actually really good and really talented. Like, most people, when they get into the NFL, they struggle because as fast and as good as you were in college, that literally doesn't do anything once you're in the pros because you're playing against like 3 or 4 professionals in college. Once you're in the pros, all these guys are freak athletes, and the freak of the freak athletes. Like, people that were like the best players in your like high school football team, they can't cut it even in like the minor leagues of football, much less the NFL. So I expect whoever the quarterback is to throw for somewhere around 4,000 yards, just because the NFL is a different league now and you throw for a lot of yards. So anywhere from 3,500 to 4,000 yards, but not that they're going to be any type of good. They're still going to throw interceptions, still going to be an average at best quarterback.
Yeah, I think Trevor Siemian, I think his ceiling is basically Alex Smith. Just be a game manager. Paxton Lynch, I think he was a first-rounder. I do think he has a great arm. Mm-hmm. I just think he has to improve on his pocket presence and all that and, kind of adjust to the game speed.
Right.
So I do think that's something that we could see in the future. But, Trevor Siemian, he didn't have a tough time looking for Demaryius Thomas, obviously. He didn't have a tough time looking for Emmanuel Sanders as well. I think the one concern I do have with this team is probably the running back position. You got Devontae Booker. You got Shizay Anderson. I can't even say his name. I can't even say his name.
C.J. Anderson.
Yeah, I can't say his name. I don't know why. But you got those two guys there. Anderson was hurt. Devontae Booker, who is a local product from where we do our show at, he did effectively well, but he looked like, he wasn't adjusted to the game speed at all. I think he only averaged like 3.5 yards a carry. But right now, I do think the best group of players on this team regarding fantasy is the receivers. I do think they're going to be the most productive group from this team next year. All right, we're going to take our last break here, and when we return, we're going to discuss Carlos Hyde. Yeah, it looks like John Lynch, the 49ers general manager, said he must prove himself. So we're going to discuss Carlos Hyde's fantasy outlook for 2017 when we return to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores a goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
All right, welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And to win the show today, we're going to discuss Carlos Hyde, the San Francisco 49ers running back, who was starting for that position in the past couple of years. Well, it looks like new general manager John Lynch said that he must prove himself in this new regime, including Kyle Shanahan as the head coach. And, he was the 57 overall pick in 2014. When he's fully healthy, Carlos Hyde looks really well. But the thing about him is that he just can't stay healthy.
Right.
His running style, I feel like he can't last a full 16-game season.
That's the problem, yeah. Like, there's talks about maybe them taking Fournette to replace him. Because it's not like Carlos Hyde isn't good. It's just if you can only play in so many games, like, you need to find people that can go all the way. Like, how's that saying go? Like, the best ability is availability kind of thing like that. Like, it kind of flows like that with Hyde. Like, Hyde's not bad. I mean, Hyde's like at Hyde's apex, he's probably like a top 15 running back, something like
there.
that.
Yeah.
Like, he's not necessarily like anybody like Ezekiel Elliott status, but he's still pretty good and good enough to be on a team. It's just I feel like his destiny later on is to be like that backup running back that comes in like D'Angelo Williams style. Like, whenever you kind of like need him to play for a few games, he's got you. But if you rely on him the whole season, that's when things go south.
I think he can be a great complimentary back if the Niners decide to pull the trigger on Fournette. That would be an absolutely bruising combo of the running back, especially in a Kyle Shanahan offense. And let's just say if the Niners do happen to draft Fournette at the number 2 selection, I would be really interested to see how Kyle Shanahan could kind of fit Fournette and Hyde's talents in the same offense. That's something that I'll be really interested to see. And then we did see how 2 running backs are effective in a Shanahan offense last year. With Atlanta, Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman were pretty much one of the top 2 fantasy running backs last year.
Right.
And we saw how that worked out. So maybe we can see the same thing, even though both these guys are 2 different type of players, not only from each other, but from Freeman and Coleman. Carlos Hyde, he has missed 12 of the past 32 games.
Yeah. That's no good. Yeah, the thing, like, you can't miss that many games, man. You can't miss 6 games a year and think everything's going to be hunky-dory. And like, oh, okay, cool, I'm going to be your running back. Like, no, man, like, you kind of have to play, if not all 16, like, we'll let you slide with, like, missing a game. But, like, we kind of want you to play in all of them.
Yeah, John Lynch said that they're really high on him of what he can do in the offense. They think he can be a highly productive player. But I do think that they are concerned about his injuries. But when I was watching the first game of the season last year, the 49ers and the Rams, and, Carlos Hyde, he did really good in that game. But I was looking at the hits he was taking, the type of style that he has. Man, he can't last a 16-game season. I don't think he can. I think the only time he's played more than 10 games was last year, actually, as a starter. He did play 13, but remember, he was hurt for most of it. He did have 988 yards, so he was literally 12 yards away from a 1,000-yard season. He did have 6 touchdowns, so that was the best year he had. And remember, this wasn't the Chip Kelly offense.
Right.
So, a Kyle Shanahan offense, he can do a lot better. I do think he did miss a lot of games, even though they weren't really good. I think 2015, that's the year that he missed pretty much half the season. They really needed him that year. But I do think Hyde can be a really productive player in Shanahan's offense. It just, honestly, the injuries concern me, especially as a fantasy owner. I've been kind of scared to draft Hyde past couple years because, 2015, you don't really know what he can do as a starter. He looks like he can play effectively well. But, of course, he had the durability issues last year.
Right.
I was kind of scared because, he gets, his style, his durability concerned me, and he did have a productive year, but he just wasn't consistent. This year, I would be a little shy. I think I'm more reluctant to take him this year because of Kyle Shanahan, but still, I would have a backup option in place. Remember, they got Tim Hightower as well, and if they happen to draft Leonard Fournette, then Leonard Fournette is probably going to take over that starting role.
Yeah, like, it's one of those, like, it's a different kind of situation, but like, I'd always be afraid. Back when you had D'Angelo Williams and Jonathan Stewart in Carolina, right? Like, you never knew which one was going to get, like, the bulk of the carries, who was going to get the most yards, so you didn't draft, at least I didn't draft either of them, right? And this whole situation now with Carlos Hyde, kind of like you said, you were kind of scared to draft him because you didn't know what he was going to be. Now, if you imagine if they get Leonard Fournette, it's just like, okay, so literally which one's going to be the guy? Like, which one's going to be the one that you rely on? I mean, the thing in Atlanta this year where you had Tevin Coleman and Devontae Freeman, like, that worked out well enough for both of them, but I can imagine people at the beginning of the year being like, okay, I don't Neither of you. Forget it.
I actually had Devontae Freeman on my team. It actually pretty worked out well for me.
Right.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you even have situations where, you know, something like New England where LeGarrette Blount had 1,000 yards, but they kind of spread it around as far as, like, not spread it around, but, like, they use their running game in other ways. Like, you do the thing, a little screen pass, it's basically like a running play like that. Like, they use stuff in different ways. You get something like Seattle this year where they didn't know what they were doing, and they were trying to find a bunch of people. They're trying to insert every single running back they possibly could, and none of it ever kind of, like, stuck. So, yeah, all of this stuff that's happening with the Niners, and also all this being said, we assume that they're going to have, like, a great season rushing. The Niners also need a lot of talent everywhere else, so just because Fournette goes there doesn't mean he's going to get 1,000 yards.
No, it doesn't mean that. Remember, this is a team that has a lot of holes on the offensive side of the ball, especially at quarterback. They may go that route in the draft. We don't know. But as of right now, I think Fournette to the Niners sounds nice, but, like, I just don't know if he will be a good fit for the Niners. I would like to see Fournette with the Jaguars. I would like to see him in Carolina. I think for Fournette to have a really good impact in fantasy, I think it will be with the Jaguars because he's going to get the ball at least 20 to 25 times
Sure.
in that team.
I can see that, yeah.
All right, well, that's going to conclude our show. I'll be back on Tuesday.
Yeah, you're back on Tuesday.
Yeah,
I'm back on Friday.
All right, well, I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. As always, I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And you can catch the show on a variety of platforms, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, even on our new, I think we have a partnership now with blogtalkradio.com, so you can listen to it on there. As all the episodes are on demand. You can also go on the website, gsmcpodcast.com. And, of course, you can follow the show on Twitter, Instagram, at the handle at GSMC_FFootball, and the Facebook page, Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. You guys have a great weekend. Thank you for tuning into the show, and you guys come back next week.